So as Caleb reminded us, and Michael told us last week, it's Advent. It's the beginning of the church year for us. And during Advent, we have the unique privilege of holding in tandem the two comings of Jesus, his past and his future. We know in his past, it was a very humble, unassuming beginning. He was born as a baby to a peasant family in a corner of the Roman Empire. But make no mistake, despite the humble beginnings, he was God wrapped in flesh, and he was destined to become king of the cosmos. And he did on a Friday in the Roman Empire on a hill called Golgotha. The Romans thought they were crucifying him, but it was his coronation as king of the cosmos. And his future coming, oh, that's going to be not so humble and unassuming and quiet in a back corner. He's going to come on a white horse, and on his robe and on his thigh will be written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So I think I say this every time I preach and every time I teach. At the core of this book is a story, a grand story, the story of the whole world, the story of Yahweh, Israel's God, and it's the story that makes sense of our lives. Genesis records its beginning, Revelation its end, and Jesus is the climax. And one of the themes woven throughout the story is that of kingship. And Michael started us at the beginning last week, as every good story does. And he was telling us that once there was a king. Because for all of what we might say about the muddiness of how to read and understand Genesis 1, which, by the way, extends through 2-3, because you got to get all the way to day 7. For all there is to understand, one thing we can say for sure is that it is kingdom language. You see, it's the story of the one true creator God who in days 1 through 6 orders the world, the heavens and the earth. And then on day 7, it says he rests. He's not taking a nap. He is sitting on his throne. That's the language of Genesis 1. He rests. He sits on his throne. The ordering of his kingdom is done. And now it may move forward. It may expand. And day 6 is important for understanding his administration and his expansion plan. That is when he creates humans. And as Michael told us last week, what he did by placing his image in strategic places in the earth is very much like the kings of the world would do. You see, that word for image in the Hebrew, it's tselem, and it's often translated idol in other places. And so what the kings would do is, because kings couldn't be everywhere at once, is that they would have carvings, usually of stone or wood, placed in strategic places in his empire. And it was a reminder, a representative of his rule and reign. This is who is the king of the land, and all the power and authority vested in him is imaged in this idol, in this image. And sometimes those images would be engraved on buildings or even on coins. Hopefully that rings a bell of a story with Jesus. But God does something different. Instead of making life less images, he makes life full images. He makes humans to image him. Male and female, he makes them and he places them in a strategic place, and he gives them a job to do. That is, be fruitful and multiply, expand, and rule and reign. And how are they to rule and reign? Well, in relationship with him, they are to rule and reign by distributing his justice on the earth. This is paradise gained. And that lasts till page 3. Till the humans rebel, giving us the story, as Michael reminded us, of paradise lost. And if our vision of what was lost or what was fractured in Genesis 3 is just humans' relationship with God, we've diminished it. We've downplayed it. You see, this was fractured. What was fractured was the stability of creation itself. And we hear her groaning in floods, hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes. And, and what was fractured was in ourselves. We no longer know who we are or our worth. Sometimes we might love ourselves too much, and other times not enough. And then what else was fractured was our relationship with one another. And Michael said, if you're unsure, look around us. And he described a world full of these fractures like this: wars that never end, poverty that rages unchecked, disease, violence and crime, racism and classism, unemployment, infertility, depression, anxiety, and suicide. This is what it looks like outside of God's rule. This is what it looks like when God is not imaged into the world, when we are not reflecting his image. This is what it looks like when humans rebel and dethrone him as king of the cosmos. But unlike the kings of the world, who when their subjects rebel against them, he punishes them. He's full of wrath and anger. The God of the Bible, the King, who created this good world, who said this world was good, looks at them in Genesis 3. And I wish we had time to unpack that. Michael unpacked it just a little. This is not, Genesis 3, God's response is not the response of an angry, wrathful God king. It is the response of a broken father. And so, he explains to them what life will be like now. There'll be toil in the very ways that they were supposed to be fruitful. And he clothes them and he removes them as a form of protection from paradise. And this is paradise lost. But he doesn't leave it there. He decides right there and then he's going to put his creation back on track. And by the time we get to Genesis 12, we get a picture of what that plan is. And you know it by a man named Abraham who becomes a people named Israel. And if you look at the mission of Abraham, all the components of Genesis 1 and 2 are there. So just to briefly tell you how Genesis 12 starts, go to a place. Land, Genesis 1 and 2. The humans are given a land. It was called Eden then. This will be called Israel. And then he says, to a place I will show you. Well, if he's showing them, he must be with them, so they're with God's presence, just like in Genesis 1 and 2. Land, God's presence. And then finally, he tells Abraham that through him, through this people he is going to become, all the nations of the world will be blessed. You see, God doesn't rescind his blessing on people. If somebody told you in Genesis 3 that humans were cursed, they read it wrong. Go back, read it again, read it carefully. The land is cursed, the serpent is cursed. Humans are not cursed. Men are not cursed. Women are not cursed. They are blessed. They are blessed to carry his blessing out into the world. So he takes that major human blessing and he hones it in on one group of people. Think of it this way. Abraham and descendants are God's ambulance rushing to the scene of chaos in creation. And how are they going to do this? Well, they are going to live like Genesis 1 and 2 people. Right here, smack dab in the middle of chaos, that is their assignment. And how does it look like? How do they do that? Well, he gives them instructions. You've heard of them as Torah. It's unfortunate that so often the Hebrew word Torah gets interpreted law. That's not what it means. The word Torah means instruction, not laws. There is no such thing in the ancient world like legal legislation in our world. Law or instruction in the ancient world is wisdom literature. And so what these instructions are that we hear about in Torah are their wisdom for this people to live in such a way that they become individually, Genesis 1:26 through 28 people, and relate to each other as a community of Genesis 1:26 through 28 people. And this is how we've been studying Deuteronomy on Wednesday mornings, and this is sort of our flagship quote, that these instructions are rooted in Yahweh's covenant guaranteed restoration plan, and they provide an open-ended vision of a perfectly ordered society with provisions that reckon with the imperfections of real people. So Torah is meant to be studied and meditated on, and then it's the wisdom to guide them into being a Genesis 1 and 2 community. And right smack in the middle, so when you hear that term, the Book of the Covenant, it actually refers to Deuteronomy 12 through 26, those chapters. Those are the expanded stipulations, the expanded instructions given to Israel. And that if you know the story of Josiah, which is the 8th century BC, they find the Book of the Covenant, the Book of the Law, in the temple ruins, and they come. This is what it is. It's these stipulations. And embedded in these stipulations in Deuteronomy 17 are what Richard read to us today. It's the instructions for a king. So it's only going to take me a second to go through them. But here they are. In this chaotic world where there are kings all over the place, every nation has their king. Israel's king is going to look different. Now, you might remember, if you read your Old Testament well, that 1 Samuel 8 is when Israel asks for a king. And they kind of get in trouble when they do. It's seen as sin. But it's not seen as sin here. We could go through the problem with what they said in 1 Samuel 8 that was a problem. But that wasn't the problem, that they wanted a king. It's the kind of king they wanted. This is the kind of king that if he follows the instructions, this king is actually a model Israelite. This king is the pinnacle of a Genesis 1:26 through 28 human. So listen, this is what the instructions are. It told who the king can be, things that the king couldn't do, don't do, and then what the king do, what he should do. So who is he? First of all, he has to be an Israelite. He had to be someone from among them, and he had to be someone that God himself had chosen. So that's who he is. An Israelite chosen by God. What can't he do? Don't do this. Basically, there were 4 things he couldn't do, and all of them amount to accumulating signs of power and wealth that the other kings had. The first is he could not accumulate horses. Horses were for war. And however many horses you had to do with your war machine. The kingdom of God doesn't come that way. Don't accumulate horses. Don't accumulate wives. This isn't about not becoming a sex addict. This is about getting covenants with your neighbors, because they were only supposed to have a covenant with Yahweh. But by taking covenants with these other nations, they're not trusting Yahweh. Marriages mean covenants with other nations. So no horses, no extra wives. Wealth, be careful. Be careful with wealth, because Yahweh has a lot to say about wealth that is accumulated on the backs of your brothers and wealth that is hoarded in such a way that you don't help your sister. Not only that, the refusal to accumulate wealth in that way says, I trust Yahweh to provide, and I am content with what he's given me. And then the final thing he was not to do was he was not to consider himself better than his fellow Israelites. Did you know that apart from being called king, Israel's kings could only take the title of brother? It was never supposed to get that these people that you are, quote, ruling, they're actually your brothers. And then what is he to do? Of all the privileges of being king, this is the one thing he gets to do. He gets to write out for himself a copy of the Book of the Covenant. And then he is to meditate on it day and night. He is going to let it seep into the pores of his skin so that he embodies it, so that he lives it out, so that he is that model Israelite, or that model Genesis 1:26 through 28 human. This is the picture of the future king that Deuteronomy, that the law, that Torah has set out. And we know that that is Jesus. Jesus, who was born of a peasant Israelite family, chosen by God. What was said at the Transfiguration, the voice from heaven said, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Don't accumulate signs of power and wealth or place yourself above others. Jesus was homeless, penniless. His kingdom came not as power enforced by violence, which is the message Rome was sending with his crucifixion, but his kingdom came in love expressed in forgiveness. And then finally, he called his disciples brothers and sisters, and he washed their feet. And then finally, what did he do? He embodied Torah. As John said, he was the Word manifested in human flesh. He embodied. If you want to know how the wisdom of Deuteronomy 12 through 26 fleshes out, look at Jesus and do what he did. This is our future king. This is a person restored to the royal vocation given to humanity in Genesis 1:26 through 28. This is the one who will come in the clouds on a white horse, whose name on his robe and on his thigh will be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Amen.